Okay. So let me welcome you here too. I'm glad you took time out of your schedules to be here. If I wasn't here, I'd be chopping firewood for the winter, so I'm glad to be here. Give you a little bit of background on what I'm about to show you, and I'm going to see if this thing works. Yay! I have spent a lot of time with student organizations, and I think it's important that students kind of have a sense of where the institution came from and why we're Tigers and why we're a land-grant institution. So they have a sense of their heritage and so on, and hopefully as they go on through school, they'll understand it more, and they graduate, they'll be more proud of it. And so I've pulled together a lot of history that I've shared with student recruiters and Camp War Eagle counselors and War Eagle girls and Plainsmen from the perspective of the students. There's a lot of legends out there, a lot of guessing about where things came from, but most of those things, if you follow it back through the student literature, student publications, you can get a pretty good sense of why we're the Auburn Tigers, why we say War Eagle. Legends are a dangerous thing, and my favorite one, those of you who know campus know Langdon Hall, there's a big brass rendition of the Auburn seal out in front of Langdon Hall that a student group put in there right after spring graduation 1999. And just a week after they put that thing in the ground, the concrete is not even dry on setting that thing yet, some student recruiters were taking a tour group by and said, and here's the Auburn seal, and legend has it that if you do this, I'm saying that thing's been there a week and it already has a legend. The athletics department especially likes to put a lot of maybe this, maybe that kind of stuff out there. Former athletic director David Housel was real good about mystique and mystery, and he was a former editor of the Auburn Plainsmen. And anybody ever see the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance? Towards the end, it's a great movie if you haven't seen. John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Marvin Lee. The media has built up this hero, and then they find out that the hero isn't a hero after all. And so a lot of the newspaper people are sitting around the potbelly stove saying, what do we do now? And they use more colorful language, but basically the message says, if legend sells more papers than fact, print the legend. And sometimes I think that's where a lot of these legends on campus here can come from. But what I want to do is spend a little bit of time and go over with you our mascot, our battle cry, our school colors, and our nickname, and give you a little idea from the student's perspective where those came from. So let's start with our mascot, the Auburn Tigers, personified by Aubie the Tiger. Is Aubie going to be around somewhere today? He's probably all over campus. If you go to the athletic website, they will claim, or used to claim, they've changed it a lot, that it came from Oliver Goldsmith's poem from 1770 called The Deserted Village. Does anybody know what that poem, the significance of that poem? Anybody know the first line of that poem? Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain. That poem is where the town of Auburn got its name from, and eventually Auburn University. If it hadn't been for that poem, we would now be Geneva University. Okay, so thank goodness for that poem. But it's a story warning about you better watch out what's going on now, or you'll have consequences you don't want to deal with in the future. And it's about a beautiful village that gets destroyed by the rich and wealthy people. It's kind of like that, who is it, Joan Baez did that song in the 70s, Big Yellow Taxi, don't it always seem to go, you don't know what you got till it's gone. It's kind of that kind of a story to it. And there is a line near the back that says where crouching tigers wait their hapless prey. And that's why the athletics department thinks our mascot came from that poem, which sounds great if you're a football coach and the visiting team's coming in and you're going to pounce on them. But if you read it in context, tigers are a bad thing there. You would not, that's with scorpions and snakes and all kinds of bad things. And you wouldn't be reading about all this destruction of beauty and so on and say, oh, tiger, I want to be a tiger. Okay, it just didn't seem to fit. So I kept looking, and I wanted to go back and say, okay, when did the students start using us as, or calling us Auburn Tigers? So if you want to look what was on the student mindset 100 years ago, 150 years ago, where do you think you can go to find out that information? In the main library, down on the basement floor, is a place called Archives and Special Collections, or Special Collections and Archives, I think they call it. And they go back, they have the old student yearbooks. What do we call our student yearbook? The Glomerata, or we call it the Glom. What does that name mean, glomerata? What's it sound like? It's from the same word as conglomeration. It used to be a senior yearbook where they were pulling together all of their experiences at Auburn, conglomerating their time at Auburn into their senior yearbook. Okay? So you can go back and look at the gloms. They've got all of them in the library. You can also look at the student newspaper. What's our student newspaper now? The Auburn Plainsmen. Okay? Now, it used to not be the Auburn Plainsmen. If you go back 100 years ago, it had a more traditional name then. A lot of schools called their student paper after their school colors. Anybody know the student newspaper for the University of Alabama? The crimson and white. Okay, so we used to be the orange and blue up until World War I. It used to be the literary societies that published the student paper as a way to get their writings out there. After World War I, those literary societies never reformed, and so the student paper just kind of fell apart. And the faculty finally picked it back up and gave the responsibility to the journalism students. And they completely kind of rebirthed the student paper as the Auburn Plainsmen, and it's been that ever since. So you go back and look at the old orange and blue, you go back and look at the gloms. The first glom was printed in 1897. Again, it's a senior yearbook, and the word tiger is in there already. The seniors, they've been playing sports now for 5 years, since that first football game, and they wanted to have their cheers in the senior yearbook so they could remember the cheers. So here's an example of a cheer back in 1897. Tiger, 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 rah, 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 blank. Not real imagining. And then if Johnson scored a touchdown, it would be rah, 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 Johnson. Okay, so you put that name in there. Actually, the next year, 1898, the students dedicated that cheer, a specific cheer, to our coach at the time. So they would say that cheer for our coach. Anybody know who our coach was in 1897, 98? John Heisman. The Heisman Trophy is named for. So that was rah, 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 Heisman. Okay. So here's another one. Hoorah, rah, 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 tiger, Auburn. Okay. No body getter in there, right? Nothing too extravagant. Actually, the students had a rally back in the 30s, I think it was, to come up with new cheers because they kind of got tired of these after a while. And I think that's where body getter and those kind of things came from. But the word tiger's in there, but it's singular. Sometimes you see it as lowercase, so it's not like it's a mascot. Okay? So it still didn't seem to fit right. If you look at more gloms, and remember that a senior yearbook was published in the spring, so it would include the previous fall. So like the 1906 yearbook included the fall of 1905, spring of 1906. Okay? Tiger appears in a couple places. 1907, 1908 gloms, nothing. Okay? 1909 glom had the first image of a tiger, a little cartoon image I'm going to show you. It also happened to be a year that I noticed we won the conference championship. We used to be in what was called the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association, which was like 30 different teams, big schools, small schools, Mercer, Sewanee, those kind of schools. So we were the champions, and on this little cartoon of the tiger, on the tiger's collar, is the word champion. So here's the cartoon. Here's an Auburn player dragging the defender across the goal line. Here are the teams we played: Howard, Gordon, Mercer, Sewanee Tech, Georgia. We weren't playing Alabama because there was some bad blood at the time, and that's a whole nother story to talk about. We were not even scored on that year. Here's a couple of happy alumni lettermen and a little cartoon tiger, and right there on the collar it says champions. 19, 10, 11, 12, 13 gloms, nothing. Then we got an amazing athlete named Kirk Newell. And if you go downtown where they have the trail, the Tiger Trail, and have the little diamond things in the sidewalk, Kirk Newell's diamond is right outside J&M Bookstore. I think they planned it that way. 1914, 15, 16 gloms with Kirk Newell here, and 13, 14, 15. SIA champions 3 years in a row, tiger images everywhere in the glom. Okay. Here's one. Here's a football tiger. Each one of those skulls is a team we beat. They were pretty serious about it. There's Georgia Tech, Vanderbilt, Carlisle, Marion. So they were pretty serious. This was a mass publication before there was like color printing, and so these students hand-colored that tiger over the top of that guy. That was our coach during that time period. Anybody know who that is? Coach Mike Donahue. Donahue Drive is named for him. He was our first inductee into the Collegiate Hall of Fame. Okay? Students loved fighting Mike Donahue. He's the guy that kind of put his foot down and said, play by the rules, we'll play you. Play anybody, anywhere, anytime. He was going off playing Army, playing Michigan, really brought a lot of recognition to Southern football when the people up north thought they were the only folks that knew how to play football. So, championships 3 years in a row, Tigers everywhere, hand-colored tiger over Coach Donahue. So it made me start thinking there's something about this word tiger that I just really don't know. So I always love to grab a dictionary and start looking at definitions. So I grabbed the dictionary off my desk. And if you look up the first couple definitions, large, fierce, flesh-eating animal of the cat family, any kind of a similar big cat, so you start conjuring up images like that. But if you keep reading further definitions, in my dictionary anyway, one who resembles a tiger in fierceness and courage. So if you were the team that fought courageously and fiercely enough to win the conference championship, you were a tiger. You were the tigers of the conference. And you start seeing that kind of terminology used. And if you think that back to military encounters, military groups that won battles were the tiger of the battle. So that starts making sense, okay? Another definition, one who fights fiercely when aroused, and then a loud yell, often the word tiger, at the end of a round of cheering. So all that hoorah, rah, tiger, tiger, rah, rah, rah kind of starts fitting in there too. You're going to start coming up with your own cheers now, aren't you? All right. So, with that context then, what it appears as is that when we were the champions of the conference, the Tigers of the conference, it was a Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association conference at the time, we were the Tigers of the South. So being called a tiger was symbolic of being the champions. And there's a reference I've got to go back and find, but believe it or not, Vanderbilt had won the conference championship the year before this one time, and there was a write-up that Auburn was going to have to go to Nashville to play the tiger in her den. So we were going to play Nashville, the previous year's champion or tiger in Nashville. Okay. So this is a picture of the 1913 championship team. There's Coach Donahue, the smallest guy out there. Kirk Newell is somewhere in the middle there. Don't know, there he is right there, Captain Kirk Newell. Just an amazing, amazing athlete at the time. So we are the Tigers. I've never seen where the Board of Trustees or anybody has ever voted on it, but there's a couple of 100,000 alumni out there that have been calling us the Tigers. That happened at a time when the whole idea of a mascot was changing too, that 1913, 14, 15 time period. Originally a mascot was a lucky charm, and if you look it up in the dictionary, that's still one of the definitions. And so if you go back in that era, back in the late 1800s, students would take a stick to a game, and somebody would run up and down the sidelines with the stick, and the students would yell as the stick went past them. That was their lucky charm. Anybody know what Georgia's first mascot was, University of Georgia? It was a goat. The students brought a goat to the game and ran the goat up and down the sidelines with what they called crimson and black colors and it's tied in its hair at the time. Now we think of it as Georgia red, back then they called it crimson. So a mascot was just a lucky charm, and it could change with each game, it could change with each season. Well, during that 1913, 14, 15 time period, people wanted mascots to be more symbolic and representative and stick with the team. We were the Tigers of the South when mascots became something kind of more permanent, and we just became the Tigers. Okay? So it was a fortunate time for us to be champions. I don't know what our mascot would be if we had been losing those games. Okay? So, but we're the Tigers of the South and just became the Auburn Tigers. It's also symbolic, I think, that Princeton was the first real collegiate powerhouse in football, and they became the Princeton Tigers as well. Okay? Even Coach Heisman used to wear a Princeton sweatshirt when he was practicing with the team, not because he ever went to Princeton, but he wanted the team to play like the Princeton Tigers. So then, there's that. Where did that come from? You hear us called the Plainsmen quite a bit. Well, the problem is there got to be too many Tigers. Okay? Everybody wanted to be thought of, at least, as the champions, the tough guys, the ones who could fight fiercely and so on. Coach Heisman left here, went to Clemson in 1900. What's Clemson? Tigers. Clemson Tigers. Okay. Coach Donahue left here, went to LSU in 1924. What's LSU? LSU Tigers. Now there's Missouri. We got Missouri Tigers floating around here from time to time. So if you were a sports writer, and later when radio came on, if you were a radio personality and you had LSU playing Auburn, you got Tigers against Tigers, how are you going to keep your audience following what you're talking about? In fact, I heard Rod Bramblett 3 years ago now, must be an odd year. LSU was here and Rod Bramblett, I'm at the game watching it, but I'm listening to the radio, and I see Auburn Tigers just scored a touchdown, but Rod said the Tigers just scored. Well, if you didn't know, if you weren't at the game, you wouldn't know which Tigers. So they start using modifiers. If I were to say that the Bayou Tigers just scored, who would that be? If I said the Tiger of the Plains just scored? Auburn. Okay, so it goes back to that loveliest village of the plain. So you start to see a lot of ways to kind of spice it up and use nicknames to keep people on track if Tigers are playing Tigers. So you see in the writings of the time that we were called the Men from the Plains, the Team from the Plains, the Tiger of the Plains, the Tiger Plainsmen, and finally just the Plainsmen. Okay. Now the baseball team back in the 70s tried to kind of pull away and say, okay, all you people, you're Tigers, but we're Plainsmen. And finally the athletic department ruled them back in and said, no, we're all Tigers. But they kind of like that whole thing associated with Plainsmen. So we have Plainsman Park where the baseball team plays. And again, we have the student paper was renamed in 1924 after the First World War when those literary societies never reformed like I talked about. So Plainsman is around. It's not our mascot. It's kind of a nickname. Use it if it helps kind of keep things straight or you want to liven things up. Make sense? So we are the Tigers, but it's okay to call us Plainsmen if that helps keep things straight. Then there's that one. Our battle cry, our greeting, depending on whether you're greeting friend or foe. Where'd that come from? Who's talking about the eagle? What had happened? Are you going to be disappointed if I tell you that's not right? Again, there are a lot of legends. So what I wanted to do was say, when did the students start using War Eagle? Okay, and the athletics department has their story. There's a lot of stories about it. The first time I can find it in print being used by the students was in the 1919 Glom. Here's a little cartoon with a freshman rat, upperclassmen outside the window, eat 'em up tigers, rat, War Eagle. Anybody know why they called freshmen rats at the time? Most of them would come in by train without anything to eat, a place to live, and they scurry all over town, kind of like rats coming off a ship coming into wharf and so on. So the townspeople, and it wasn't just here, there's a lot of different places, but they'd come off the train like rats, just coming over the top of the building. Anyway, there's freshman rats. The band still uses rats for their new students and so on in the band, which they have a nice family atmosphere with that. They like it. So they're rats until Auburn wins its first football game. Isn't that right? Do we have any band rats in here? I think a new member of the band is always a rat till we win our first football game, so that's a big thing for them. The most popular legend goes back to our very first football game against Georgia in 1892. The legend has it that Auburn was behind, and there was a Civil War veteran with an eagle from the battlefield on his shoulder, and the eagle takes off and flies around the stadium, and the crowd starts cheering, and the football team gets riled up and runs down the field for a last-minute game-winning touchdown. Hoorah, we beat Georgia. I don't know why they did that. It's a great story, okay? But it never could have happened that way. If you go back and read the Atlanta Constitution that covered that game, actually they had a whole week ahead of the game just explaining to people what football was, because nobody down here had ever seen it before. And then they had almost a page and a half write-up of how it happened. Couldn't happen that way. We won that game 10-0, okay? At the time, this is 1892 was February, like February 20th, cold, rainy day in Piedmont Park, Atlanta. Why would we be playing football in February? The first big game, they wanted a big crowd there, okay? That was a celebration of Washington's birthday, back before they combined Washington and Lincoln into President's Day and so on. And so they had a big city, Atlanta, had a federal holiday with a lot of people off work, so everybody could come to the ball game. Went over there and played for quite some time. Auburn finally scored a touchdown, which was 4 points at the time. You had to actually reach the ball across the line and touch it down on the other side of the line. and then you had a chance to make a 2-point extra point. So we scored a touchdown, made the extra point, so we were up 6-0. They took a break so they could just kind of mend their wounds and warm back up, and didn't even really have a name for it. We call it halftime now. And then they came back after the break, and Auburn scored another touchdown for 4 more points, missed the extra points, so we were up 10-0. They played for about another hour, and Georgia finally just got cold and mad and left. Okay, so we won the game. So no story in there about an eagle, no come from behind victory, no nothing in there. Finally, and this is about 10 years ago, the guy who made that story up confessed. Okay, it was a former editor of the Plainsmen, and wasn't James Phillips. His last name was Phillips. After thinking, it was not Red Phillips, the football player. But in '59, he was a cub reporter for the Plainsmen. They gave him a space to fill, and he had nothing. So he made it up. Okay. Anybody guess how he even thought of that kind of a story? It's a great story. Anybody from Atlanta? Anybody, have you been to the Cyclorama? What's the Cyclorama?
Yeah, it's a 3-dimensional painting sculpture of the Battle of Atlanta. And whenever they do the tour, they point out the war eagle that then came to Auburn in 1892.
Right. So if you go to Atlanta, right, just as you're going in the front gates of the zoo, you're excited about this, aren't you?
I'm very disappointed. I guess Abraham Lincoln never cut down a tree, or was it
George Washington?
Cherry tree. I mean,
We'll get back to that next lecture. You're getting ahead of the lectures. We'll get back to that. So just as you're getting ready to go into the Atlanta Zoo, if you look off to the left, there's a building. It's a big building. It's got a steam locomotive and everything in there from the Civil War. But you sit on a stage in the middle of a room, and the stage turns 360 degrees, stopping at different dioramas. So it's got 3-dimensional figures, and it kind of fades into a painting that makes it all look 3-dimensional. And it tells the story of the Battle of Atlanta during the Civil War. And at each station, when it stops, there's some audio that goes with it to explain what that segment of the battle was. And in one of the segments, there's a military group from, I think, Wisconsin, that actually did have a bald eagle that followed them around that they named Old Abe. But in the audio, it says their war eagle. And that's where he got the whole idea of war eagle and put the whole story together and published it. And it was out there for 50 years before he finally admitted that it was made up. He told David Housel was still athletic director at the time, and when he confessed, he asked David Housel to take it off the website, and David said, no, it's a good legend. I think I'll leave it there. That whole when legend sells more paper than fact, I'll go with the legend kind of thing. But nonetheless, students were using War Eagle back in 1919. So it had to come from somewhere. Okay. So why were the students using it? So you start doing things like Googling and searching all different ways, and you actually get lots of hits. Now, I tried to look it up in a dictionary and couldn't find it in my dictionary anyway. But there's a cave in Arkansas, there's a state park in New England, there's a story of an Indian chief on the second removal of the creeks that passed through here and gave a blessing to the town and gave us the name. Georgia, back in the 1940s, tried to lay claim to it, saying, well, they had a play called The Bald Eagle, and we just misunderstood their play, and we got our whole battle cry from them. Well, the Auburn alumni didn't want to hear that. Story of an emblem falling off a cadet's cap, and there's just so many different stories out there. I finally stopped looking. I said, I'm just going to go on to something else. And by the way, most of this information I'm sharing with you, I say it came from the library. It's a great place to spend some time. So if you got a couple hours tomorrow before the football game or something like that, just head on down into archives. I would usually go in there, end of the day at work, 2 hours till a student meeting. I just go spend a couple hours in archives. And you can find all kinds of stuff you weren't even looking for. I came across one thing. Anybody remember General Lee's horse during the Civil War? Traveler. Do you know who General Lee bought Traveler from? Anybody know the name of our main engineering building? Brown Hall? He bought it from Greenbrier, Virginia at the time, from the Brown family. So a former president of our university sold General Lee his horse to ride through the Civil War. I didn't know that till I just spent some time in the library. Crazy stuff over there. So I'd kind of given up on this whole thing. But I grew up in Westcliff, Colorado. We have a little weekly newspaper called the Wet Mountain Tribune because it's a wet mountain valley up on the eastern face of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. I subscribe to it just so I can kind of keep up on what's going on at home. And back in February of 2001, I get the newspaper, And I'm reading through what's called Peaks of the Past. It's little stories from 100 years ago in the valley there, which was a gold and silver mine area. Here's cut out of the paper, and right there in this lower left corner, from 1901, last week Sam Clay trapped a fine large war eagle on his place on the west side of the valley, which measures 7.5 feet from tip to tip of wings. So I'm here in Auburn, Alabama, yelling war eagle, having no idea what it means. And there's some farmer out in Colorado who says he's got one. So again, I think there must be something to this word, this term, this phrase that I don't know. And I've already tried to look it up in a dictionary, and it wasn't in there, but I figured maybe my dictionary wasn't old enough. And I knew they had an old dictionary over in the Alumni Center up in the Sewell Library, so I went across the street, and if you get an old enough dictionary, war eagle's in the dictionary. What do you think it means? It's another term for a golden eagle that was used back at that time. It was given to the golden eagle by the Plains Indians who used their feathers for their war bonnets. So 1901, if you were out west somewhere and you'd look up and see what you thought was a golden eagle standing right next to an American Indian, they would say it was a war eagle. Okay. So the vernacular's there. People are using that term as an everyday kind of thing, but why did the students start using it? So I went back to the library and searched through some files, and they have a bunch of file cabinets, and found a file folder from the 1940s where the Auburn alumni were trying to answer that same question, because this is the time frame when the Georgia people were saying that we got it from them. And so they were calling out the alumni, when did we start saying war eagle? When did we start using that? And they had responses. The Alumni Association got handwritten eyewitness accounts to this that go back to the fall of 1913. Again, we weren't playing Alabama at the time. Georgia was unbeaten. Auburn was unbeaten. We were going to meet in Atlanta at Ponce de Leon Park for the conference championship. Okay, big game. E.T. Enslin was what they called a special student. He was here just for military training. He wasn't taking English and history unless it was military history and that kind of stuff. Okay. He had to wear his cadet uniform all the time. Gus Graydon was the cheerleader. Okay, they had one person that led the student body in cheers. They had called for a pep rally on the front steps of Langdon Hall. They had reserved a special train down at the train station, 13 passenger cars, and Gus Graydon was trying to get the students all pumped up to get on the train, go to Atlanta, and cheer the team on. And Gus Graydon was using terms like, this is going to be another Battle of Atlanta. This is going to be a war. We have got to get on that train, get to Atlanta, and support our team. So E.T. Enslin was in the crowd, jumping up and down. His military cap, the emblem came off, API for Alabama Polytechnic Institute. That American eagle came off. E.T. stooped to pick it up. Gus saw him, said, what is that? And E.T. said, it's my war eagle. And Gus Graydon started yelling, war eagle, war eagle. The whole student body started yelling, war eagle. They got on the train, went to Atlanta, beat Georgia, and won one of those conference championships back in that same time frame that we took on our mascot named the Tigers. Okay? So, interesting thing happened after that. The Alumni Association had had their first big reunion that spring of 1913. They were so excited about the football team winning that first conference championship of that 3-year string that the Alumni Association decided they wanted to build the students a new gymnasium. That ultimately became Alumni Gym. Any alumni in the group that ever messed around in the Alumni Gym? It's where the War Eagle Food Court now is in Foy Hall. That used to be a gymnasium sitting there. But the president of the Alumni Association, Tom Bragg, who was a chemistry professor here, went around all over the state trying to get alumni to donate money for the new gymnasium they wanted to build. And he took Gus Graydon, the cheerleader, with him. So they'd go to Mobile and call in all the alumni for a gathering, and Gus Graydon would get them all pumped up doing the old hoorah, rah cheers and telling them you need to start saying War Eagle and so on as our new battle cry. And so they covered the whole state that summer getting donations for the Alumni Gymnasium, got more money than they started out for, and built the gym and put a swimming pool in it, as a matter of fact. They hadn't planned on before. So between the fall of 1913, with all the students yelling War Eagle, and then that next summer of 1914 with the alumni, we've just been yelling War Eagle ever since. And so, again, it's not in the Board of Trustees minutes or anywhere that I've seen that we're going to have that as our battle cry, but again, a couple 100,000 people We're going to have, what, 80+ thousand people saying it tomorrow. Make sense? War Eagle. There we go. That leaves one more thing I want to talk about, and that's our school colors, orange and blue. Anybody know where we got our school colors from? Not from the Denver Broncos. Okay. I think that guy had something to do with it. Who's that guy? Well, his ancestors. That's the Duke of Westminster, head of the Grosvenor family of Chester, England. Anybody know him? So what? We'll come back to him. Okay. Auburn did not have colors originally, but when they went to play the first football game in Atlanta against Georgia, they wanted a lot of pageantry. They really wanted people to wear colors supporting their school, ultimately so they could start asking for donations from those people. Oh, you're wearing your school colors. Wouldn't you like to donate to your school, kind of a thing? Because the South was still pretty poor at the time. It was hard to get money to support education even then. There were class colors like purple and white and so on, but no school colors. Georgia already had school colors. They actually had 3 school colors to start out with. They had what they called crimson red at the time, black, and then old gold, which was kind of a faded out whitish yellow. And their first coach, George Hurdy, who was in school at Johns Hopkins with Dr. Petrie, who came here. So it was Dr. Hurdy at Georgia, Dr. Petrie here that kind of got together and said, we need to bring football to the South so we can start getting the alumni back involved with the schools and so on. Coach Hurdy didn't like that yellow. He thought that was the color of cowards. So he convinced the student body to drop the yellow and just go with the red and black. And interestingly enough, too, on a sidelight, that's why Georgia Tech has their kind of old gold color, because they wore yellow jackets to their first game in Athens, Georgia, to get under Coach Hurdy's skin. And that was their first yellow jacket. And then they got rid of the yellow jackets, became the Golden Tornadoes and a couple other different mascots before they came back with the yellow jackets, but the Stinging Bee kind of yellow jackets. So they had school colors. We did not have school colors. Okay? But Dr. Petrie was a graduate of the University of Virginia. Okay? Now at this time frame, the University of Virginia had just changed their school colors or added sporting colors. If you go back to University of Virginia's original school colors, they were silver gray and crimson red. And the faculty of the University of Virginia would not let the students desecrate those sacred colors on a field of sport. So the students had to pick different colors for sports. Why was silver gray and crimson red so important to the faculty at the University of Virginia? It represented a blood-stained Confederate uniform, and the students could not play sports in those colors. So they had a pep rally at the University of Virginia in the fall of 1888 to pick sporting colors. And there happened to be an athlete there named Alan Potts who had spent the summer over in England rowing at Oxford. And rowing is the first sport to really have or to need colors, because it's such a distant sport. When the sculls come around the corner 5 miles away, you want to see what boat just came around the corner. So they had colored shirts on. They painted the blades of the oars a matching color. So you could see, oh, those are the blue oars coming, those are the green oars coming. And then when more teams, they had to get kind of fancy colors. So Alan Potts had a rowing scarf that he had gotten while he was in England rowing that summer, wore it to the pep rally. Someone held that scarf up. It was dark blue with 2 orange stripes. And University of Virginia picked their sporting colors from that scarf. Okay? So that's not a very good rendition, but you get the idea. If you're not familiar with rowing scarves, that's how you supported a team again. So if your favorite rowing team rowed under that kind of a color scheme on their oars, then you would knit a scarf that would somehow resemble that to show that you supported that team. In fact, some of the college students, that was their free pass into the regatta or whatever if they wore a scarf to support the team. So then the question is, back in 1892, when we were getting ready to play our first game and they wanted all this pageantry and color and so on, was there a team in England that rowed under those colors that Alan Potts would have gotten that scarf from? And yes, there was, and they still row over there today. So there it is, there's Liverpool, England. Right down here is Chester, at the head of the Dee River, right there. There's a team called the Grosvenor Rowing Club. That's the family name for the Duke of Westminster. Back in the 1860s, the Duke of Westminster at the time, really enjoyed the sport of rowing. The king already had a rowing club in Chester called the Royal Chester Club, and the Duke of Westminster wanted to compete with him, so he founded the Grosvenor Rowing Club in his family name in 1869. They still exist, they still row. That's their clubhouse. I'll show you another picture in just a second here. That's them in the water with the dark blue with the 2 orange stripes, and there's a bit of a close-up here on the blade. They frequently have to repaint because the blades fade. That's their skull house. This is the Dee River. They just bring the skulls right out. That's their clubhouse for having fun before and after the regattas. This is up in the upper deck of the clubhouse. Here are the skulls, there's the blades, and there's their colors on the bow of one of their skulls, the dark blue with the orange. And there's another shot of their blades with the 2 orange stripes. So, back in 1869, I still haven't figured out. In fact, I have people over in England trying to figure this out because that's not the Grosvenor family's heraldic colors. That's not from the days of old and the knights of old and all that kind of stuff. The Duke of Westminster just picked those colors in 1869, and they don't know why. But now they're checking into it. But apparently one of those scarfs supporting the Grosvenor Club made it to a regatta. Somehow Alan Potts from the University of Virginia traded for it, won it from them or whatever, brought it back over to this side. That was what was held up at the University of Virginia's pep rally that they picked their sporting colors from. So Dr. Petrie, who wrote our Auburn Creed and the first dean of our grad school and all that kind of stuff, was a graduate of the University of Virginia. Allie Glenn, who was part of the original Methodist group that helped found Auburn and the institution here, she was the treasurer here at the time. And it was very common to borrow traditions from the North where sports were more established and bring them down here to kind of give us a jump start. And she found a dark blue sweater, sewed an orange A on it to show Dr. Petrie what that would look like if that was our sporting colors and would be essentially what became our letter jacket for the varsity players. And he liked that. And so the women of the community scurried around, got some more dark blue sweaters, sewed orange A's on them. So when the team went to Atlanta to play Georgia, they had the school colors, orange and blue. And if you look at the Atlanta Constitution, people were encouraged, if you support the team from Georgia, come to the game wearing red and black, they called it at that time, or crimson and black. And if you support the team from Alabama, because the University of Alabama did not have a team yet, so we were the team from the state of Alabama. If you support the team from Alabama, wear orange, blue, and white. They actually had 3 colors at the time. And we've just been wearing orange and blue ever since then. And it was officially added to our university seal in 1949 and kind of carried over in 1972. That's the old API seal. So we have been orange and blue since 1892, and officially, by action of the trustees, orange and blue since 1949. So we are the Tigers. If it helps keep it straight by calling us Plainsmen, that's fine. We greet each other with War Eagle, and that's our battle cry against our foes, and we wear orange and blue, and we have shakers too. So those are my stories, and I'm sticking to them. Any questions about any of that? Questions? Disappointments? Yeah, that's pretty recent history. It's only been about 15 years or so. Now, the service fraternity, is it AOPI? AFIO. The service fraternity actually had, a living eagle that used to be in the cage out where the green space is now, that they would actually take to games and so on. But they were breaking a lot of federal laws with that because they would take it to, it's a federally sanctioned bird, and they would take it to away games and just put it in the hotel room with them and so on. And so that finally caught up with them. Everything was fine until the bird got bumblefoot. And then the vet school had to get involved, then the natural resource people got involved. So essentially the natural resource people gave the bird to the vet school, and somewhere along the line, just exercising the birds and so on, doing the flights. Tell you who Dr. Timothy Businger, who's our provost, was the dean of the vet school when that happened. So he could give you that whole lowdown. It's probably on the vet school's website. The crazy thing is that's kind of another thing that once that bird flew, it's like it'd been flying forever. Everybody just said, "Oh, I can't wait to see the bird fly again. I've been watching it for the last 40 years." Well, it's only been flying for 2 years, So, but it's a great thing. If you haven't seen the eagle fly in the stadium, it's an amazing, amazing thing. Anything else? Yeah.
I've had people tell me that we started the Tiger Walk tradition, and now every school has a Tiger
Yeah.
Walk of their own. Do you know if there's any truth to that at all?
I have not looked into it, but I'm of the same belief. I think it started here, and then everybody else just thought that was cool. So now there's the Walk of Champions and the Walk of this and the Walk of that.
So what is the
Tiger Walk, if you've not been to it, you need to do that. And I guess is it 2 hours before the game? It used to be from the old Sewell Hall Athletic residence halls. They would line Donahue Drive all the way down to the stadium intersection, and then the team would walk down through there, and people would just be there high-fiving and so on like that. Now they come in on bus. They go like to Montgomery and spend the night, and come in, but they still park the bus at Samford and Donahue. The team gets off the bus and walks down through there. Now they have to have barricades because people are coming out and hugging them and all kinds of stuff. But they basically walk 2 blocks from Samford down to the stadium, and it's a big, big deal, especially if it's a big game. It's amazing. Other cheerleaders are just in awe. The cheerleaders couldn't get past for like 45. I forget who we were playing. It was a homecoming game, maybe San Jose State, but they were trying to get from the parking space to the stadium. It took them like 45 minutes because of the crowd and Tiger Walk and all that kind of stuff. And then the next thing that's really fun, if you haven't done that, is the band. Before the band enters the stadium, have anybody seen that? They do the 4 corners thing. They'll split the marching band in fourths, and they'll spread out all 4 ways from that same intersection of, is that Thatch and Donahue? Whatever. It's Heisman now, yeah, Heisman. And then I'm assuming they're all communicating by some radio thing, but all 4 sections, cheerleaders, the whole thing, they all start at the same time, and they just kind of converge right in the middle, and the sound's just compressing down into the middle. And the drum majors are there on their high platform things, and that's really impressive too. And then what they do is they kind of reconfigure and march into the stadium. So that's a cool thing to do too. What else? Yeah.
When did we change our name to Auburn? Because didn't it used to be like the Eastern Methodist men?
We've had several different name changes. In 1856, when we were founded, we were the East Alabama Male College. And then when we reorganized as the land grant in 1872, we became the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Alabama. And then because of all the technologies and changing names at the time, in 1899, we changed to Alabama Polytechnic Institute. And then we took on university status and became Auburn University in 1960. So we've had 4 different names. You'll often see on some of the seals and so on, 1872, but that's when we were kind of reborn as a land-grant institution. What else? Thank you all very much. You've been a great audience. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.